Hello everyone. I am Daniel Jacobs.
Hi guys, my name is Wanye.
I'm Jane Webb.
I'm Bruce Jordan.
And I'm Jenny Jo.
As a group, we studied the author Nalo Hopkinson and how she uses shapeshifting and relates it to Black experience and identity. Now, before getting deeper into this topic, we would like to explore a little bit more of who exactly Nalo Hopkinson is.
Nalo Hopkinson was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1960. She started writing in 1993, and some of her work she uses Afro-Caribbean mythology. I'm sorry.
She also won the awards listed above for many of her novels. And currently she teaches in the University of California, Riverside, as well as researches science fiction.
Alright, so this is the theme of shapeshifting, and the main thing is Afro-Caribbean mythology. And in the photo here, this is Nancy the Trickster God, and the original name of that is Akan, and that means spider. And spider is Nancy can shapeshift into a spider, and it can shapeshift into a human. So and then in this sequence, he was kind of straddling with two identities to know the knowledge of all stories.
Speaking of straddling identities, we have a theme of passing. Back when slavery was prevalent, the sexual interactions between slaves and slave owners would cause some Black babies to be born with very, very light skin, nearly white. The Black people born with such skin would pass, quote unquote, into white society, reaping the benefits of being white and avoiding racial persecution. Now, while this seems like a very good practice, it also had very serious detriments. In order to pass into white society, the Black people would have to leave behind their entire Black heritage, which included their families and their ancestral homes. Many people would never see or even speak to their families ever again, some even refusing to go to big events such as funerals. And Nalo Hopkinson uses this idea of passing in many of her novels and short stories. So, some examples are Shift, A Habit of Waste, two of her short stories, and her novel, The Chaos, all of which we will go into deeper context in this presentation.
So throughout reading Nalo Hopkinson's works and secondary sources about Nalo Hopkinson, we found that shapeshifting and Black experience as well as passing were very prevalent and often tied together. So we made our research question: Does Nalo Hopkinson's use of shapeshifting reveal new knowledge about Black experience? And answering our research question, our thesis was Nalo Hopkinson's use of shapeshifting is a metaphor for Black experience because it illuminates the history of people passing and straddling identities in order to survive.
Okay, and most of Nalo Hopkinson's like short stories that she wrote, she always used shapeshifting. And in one of her main short stories is Shift, and this is where a shapeshifting god struggled with looking at the passing of white dressed women, and then Nalo Hopkinson came with a question, which the main question for that was, who do you think you are? Meaning like the struggling of shapeshifting, of turning into something else that they're not. So.
And speaking of shapeshifting, we had that theme very prevalent in this idea of Afrofuturism. Mark Derry, an author and literary critic, defines Afrofuturism as speculative fiction which treats African American issues and discusses African American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture. Now, Afrofuturist texts often explore the past and the future of Black society. When they explore the past, they often go into very traumatic experiences. Examples are the African diaspora and US slavery. An example of a book in which Nalo Hopkinson very much explores this theme is The Salt Roads. In this book, 3 women, a slave from right before the Haitian Revolution, a Haitian-born mistress from 19th century France and a prostitute from Egypt in the 4th century are connected through their shared experiences of racism, sexism, and just general oppression. And this story very much explores their desire to get out of that feeling of oppression and gain more freedom. And then when Afrofuturist text travels to the future, they travel to explore the possible futures of Black society within the white society. An example of where Nalo Hopkinson does this is in her short story, A Habit of Waste. In this short story, society has advanced far enough in which people are able to switch entire bodies, completely changing their identities. So we have a very strong feeling of shape-shifting in this story and body identity. The main character starts out born Black and then switches her body to a slim white woman's body in order to feel more attractive. So we have the idea of what is attractive in your eyes, like how do you feel about your own body, and how does the shape-shifting affect how you see yourself and in other ways. And then shape-shifting is not only an Afrofuturist text, but it's also a very powerful theme in Afropoliticism.
In contrast to the primary African movement against oppression and discrimination, this movement called Afropoliticism, as illustrated in this image, is about reclaiming or about creating a new identity for Africans across all countries, and because of a shared multiple cultural connection. They celebrate roots, R-O-E-T-S, rather than roots, R-O-O-T-S, and that they share their diversity rather than just back to Africa. This is primarily a Western movement because this is created under the movement that was post-slavery and trying to get Africans rights. It's a different movement altogether. And although this is primarily a Western movement, it does not include the lower class Africans, including those in the ghettos, for example, of cities. How this relates to Nalo Hopkinson is she is able to deal with spirituality in her works, including Brown Girl in the Ring, and tie that into this Western movement, creating a new cultural identity that has some Afro-Caribbean elements in it, but it's not a backlash against any discrimination of any sort. There is much shape-shifting in her stories. For example, in Brown Girl in the Ring, you have the main antagonist can shapeshift, and you see the interconnectedness of spirituality in the modern world with, at one point, several spirits manifesting through a modern building, it's a tower, basically. And this is about not African Canadians or African Caribbeans or any Native or African Americans, for that example. It's just about a new identity for these people that have African roots but don't want to see themselves as the minority of any country.
Nalo Hopkinson uses the chaos as literal racism. In the story, the chaos, she uses a girl named Scotch, who is a black, light-skinned girl. So throughout the story, Scotch starts to grow black spots all over her body. And I think Nalo Hopkinson uses this to show that no matter what is going on, like deep down, she's still black on the inside.
And then finally, or not finally, but in Brown Girl in the Ring, Nalo Hopkinson uses the medium of a zombie in order to represent shapeshifting, which is a little bit different from physically shapeshifting. It was more of a mental, emotional experience. And the zombie represents powerlessness of that many black attendees feel. And she states in her article about the novel Brown Girl in the Ring that the zombie represents the history of oppression, exploitation, and demonization of black people. And then finally, the protagonist in Brown Girl in the Ring wishes to transcend the boundaries of what she takes to be reality and knowledge. And in order to do that, she must shapeshift and gain new experiences, or shapeshift, I guess. And then this experience of being others allows Tijan, the protagonist of Brown Girl in the Ring, to experience empathy. And this empathy allows her to not only understand other people's perspectives, but allows other people to understand her better through her different forms. And this relates directly to Nancy, the god of shapeshifting and of the knowledge of narratives. But because Tijan, the protagonist of Brown Girl in the Ring, through gaining her experiences and new knowledge, she eventually becomes a literary critic, a reader of narratives of dreams, visions, folktales of people's lives, including her own, through her shapeshifting. And this relates to passing through the empathy aspect, since her shapeshifting allows other people to see her differently.
As you can see, through our extensive research and our attempts to understand the world of Nalo Hopkinson's novels, we have proven our thesis in that Nalo Hopkinson uses shapeshifting as a metaphor for black experience, and her metaphor illuminates the history of how people would pass in order to avoid persecution and survive as strong identities. And Nalo Hopkinson, through her books, is trying to show us that, like in the Salt Roads, how different time periods were connected through racism and sexism. These things have still not disappeared from our modern society. And that, as in the case of a habit of waste, the answer is not to completely deny who we are or our identities, but in order to truly make a more inclusive and loving world, we need to accept each other's identities and be willing to compromise and love each other as we are. So, thank you.
And log out of Google so that the next group can go ahead and get started.
I'll just, where is it?